where the moon lights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number one fan.
Hey up, and welcome back to Rate Scary. My name is Zara, Scary Zara Mary, and this week's episode is all about looking forward to 2025. So, it is already looking like a good year for horror, and 2025 is literally around the corner, which is terrifying. It seems absolutely bonkers. Don't know if it's just me in my older age, but time seems to go way too quickly now. That being said, there are some really good horrors coming up, and I am going to get into them in this episode. I'm going to go through some of the films that I'm really looking forward to, and also a few films that maybe I'm not so much looking forward to. But I thought I would start off with mentioning some films that have got some big anniversaries coming in 2025, because it's also a big year for that. When I actually started researching, I was surprised at how many films have got some quite chunky anniversaries coming up. So starting with a couple of films that are turning 50 years old in 2025, which again seems bonkers. One of my favourites, Jaws. That turns 50 years old. It was released in 1975. And I know it was before my time, but 50 years, that film still absolutely holds up. And I'm hoping that there's going to be some special releases for its 50th anniversary. Big year for Jaws. Good. Deserves it. Another film that is turning 50 years old is actually Deep Red. So Dario Argento's film, Deep Red. It's one that I haven't watched in a very long time, actually. But given it is turning 50 years old in 2025, that would suggest it is worth a rewatch. One that gets overlooked, I think, when it comes to Argento. But 100% a brilliant film, and I'm actually looking forward to rewatching that one. Then we've got a few that are turning 40 years old. So you've got Day of the Dead from George A. Romero. That was released in 1985. It's not one of my favourite Romero films. Dawn and Night are my two favourites, but still, regardless, fantastic film. Seems insane that that is 40 years old and it was released in 85. But another one that really shouldn't be 40 years old, even with a rewatch now it doesn't seem 40 years old, I would say. Fright Night. Fright Night turns 40 years old, and I'm not talking about the remake, obviously. I'm talking about the original with Chris Sarandon. I'm not even sure that's how you say his name, and I have had a Bailey's. So I could be saying names totally wrong on this podcast. But that turns 40 years old in 2025. Again, definitely worth a rewatch. Return of the Living Dead. Fantastic film. Actually, in my background, if you're watching on YouTube, you won't be able to see it very clearly, but I have a Return of the Living Dead bag, which I got kindly gifted to me by Bleeding Marvelous. Shout out Dan from Bleeding Marvelous. Love you. Always get comments on that bag whenever I wear it out. But the film turns 40 next year. Insane. And then the last one that is of note turning 40 next year. One of my favourites, Reanimator from Stuart Gordon. That turns 40 years old. Now, I've already seen some posts about some special edition stuff that is coming out in 2025 for Reanimator. Could not be more excited about that. Absolutely warranted. Now, if we look at films that are turning 30 years old, these would be films that were released in the 90s, and as we know, bit slim pickings in the 90s. When it comes to horror films, there weren't many great ones. However, I did manage to pluck one out that was released in 1995, which I do love, and that is Vampire in Brooklyn. Wes Craven's horror comedy. It's got Eddie Murphy in it. I never hear anyone talking about this film. I have it on DVD and I have watched it God knows how many times because I think it's bloody hilarious, actually. But yeah, Vampire in Brooklyn, that turns 30 years old in 2025. Then we go into films that turn 20 years old, and there are some big ones here, starting off with a huge one, and this just seems mad to me that it is 20 years old next year. The Descent. Neil Marshall's incredible film, The Descent. I remember watching this when I was at sixth form, studying film and media, and my teacher put it on for the class and said, if you want to see a masterpiece in horror, watch this. And that's what we did for that for that lesson that day, was watch The Descent. He was a great teacher. That's all we did in that class, was just watch films. But when it was films like The Descent, and another one which I'm going to mention in a second, you can't complain. The other one that he got us to watch was Wolf Creek, and that also turns 20 next year. Again, like, how is that 20 years old? That makes me feel incredibly, incredibly old. Wolf Creek 2 is equally as good, and I'm almost positive that it's been confirmed that there is a third one coming out, so that I am excited for. Then you've also got The Devil's Rejects, Rob Zombie's film. I don't think it's as good as House of a Thousand Corpses, but still a fantastic film, turning 20 years old. And then two others worth mentioning. Eli Roth's Hostel, which I will forever have so much love for. What an incredible film, like, released right at the time of Saw 2 was released that year as well, actually. So in the midst of films like Saw, Eli Roth released Hostel, and it just really scratched that itch that people had for torture type films. He slotted into that genre perfectly. And I love the Hostel films, and I do love Eli Roth as well, which will probably come up later in this episode, actually. But the last one to mention that turns 20 years old next year, which, again, I think it's one that's massively underrated and one that I 100% need to rewatch. Exorcism of Emily Rose by Scott Derrickson. It's got Laura Linney in it. More of a courtroom kind of drama, thriller with really horrible scenes in it. But that is fantastic. It's a really interesting take on exorcism films, kind of looking at a court case about a priest who performed an exorcism. If you haven't seen it, that's as much as I'm going to say, because it's worth going into that one a little bit blind, just for something a little bit different. 20 years old. And then, just to finish off on some anniversary films, some that are turning 10 years old next year. Crimson Peak turns 10 years old. I'm going to be doing an episode on Crimson Peak as part of my gothic horror dive into the subgenre. But that turns 10 years old. I basically only watched that film for Tom Hiddleston, I'm not going to lie. And that would be the only reason I would rewatch it. But we'll get into that on the episode that I do on Crimson Peak. The Witch from Robert Eggers. Geez, he's in for a big year next year with the release of Nosferatu, which, again, we will come on to. But that turns 10 years old. I don't feel like that's a 10-year-old film. I feel like that only came out a few years ago, and I have so much love for The Witch. I could ramble for hours about that, but that's not what this episode is about. And then just to finish on one final one that is turning 10 years old, and it's an appropriate time of year to mention it, but Krampus, that turns 10. The one with Toni Collette in it, the one that everyone watches at this time of year, that turns 10 years old. So there we go. That's 16, 17 films that have got big milestones in 2025, big anniversaries that they've got. I feel like that sets us up really nicely, actually, for a good year in horror. Which is a nice segue, actually, to go into some of the films that are releasing in 2025. So enough about the past, enough about the films that are having an anniversary. Let's get talking about some of the films that are releasing next year. Like I said, I am going to throw in some that I'm not so excited about. So I'll talk about a couple that I'm excited about and then throw in one that I'm not excited about, and we'll follow that format. So starting with a big one that I am very, very excited about. And that, you know, it would be silly of me not to mention Nosferatu first on this list. And I know that this comes out on the 25th of December, Christmas Day in the US, but for us poor sods in the UK, it comes out on the 1st of January. And I am gutted that I've got to wait until then to see it. And the main thing that I'm gutted about is I'm just so terrified that I'm going to come across a spoiler. We have managed to avoid what Bill Skarsgård looks like up until this point, and I am just keeping my fingers, my toes, my tits, my eyes crossed that there are no spoilers for what he looks like, because I am so excited. And I am glad that this is the film that is kicking off 2025 when it comes to horror, because I am already a huge Robert Eggers fan. Like I mentioned, The Witch. Big year for him with the anniversary of that. But with a cast of Bill Skarsgård, Lily Rose Depp, Willem Dafoe, Nicholas Hoult, the reviews coming in are already incredible. Which makes me even more excited. So what a way to kick off the year. I am going to do a specific episode on this, so that's probably about as much as I'm going to say about Nosferatu. So we'll dig into that another time. The second film that I am really excited about, and it comes out early in the year as well, is Companion. Now this is a directorial debut from Drew Hancock, who's previously only really done TV shows and shorts. And there's not an awful lot about it online, if I'm honest. A teaser trailer has come out, but it doesn't reveal an awful lot. It is described as a new kind of love story, and from the creators of Barbarian, which I think is promising because I really loved most of Barbarian, the first 2/3 of it. But what's also promising, again, is the cast. So you've got Sophie Thatcher, who you'll recognise as one of the leads from Heretic, which came out this year. You've got Jack Quaid. He plays Huey in Amazon's The Boys. Incredible series. He was brilliant in that as well. And he's also in the Scream 5 or 6. I can't remember which one. I think it's Scream 5. And then you've got Harvey Guillen, who I love. Oh my God, I love him so much. He plays Guillermo in the TV show What We Do in the Shadows. So, nice, neat little cast there. Like I said, there's not an awful lot about it online. It does look quite bizarre, quite creepy, a mix of romance, but it kind of looks like toxic romance. It looks like it's got a bit of an air of Hereditary about it, which I'm always going to be a fan of. And again, that's probably a film that I'm going to want to dive into on this podcast. But I'm excited. I'm hoping they don't reveal much more. I'd quite like to go into it as blind as I am right now, to be honest. So now for a film that I'm really not excited for. Megan 2.0, or Mithrigan 2.0, as a lot of people have called Megan, the original film, Mithrigan. I really did not enjoy the first one. However, I am not surprised that they are doing a second one, given it's coming from Blumhouse, which loves to turn out terrible movies for the most part, with the odd kind of little gem. You'll probably see that there's a bit of a theme with some of the films that I talk about that I'm not excited for. I can only hope that this second installment just goes a little bit further, a little bit harder, a little bit grittier and gorier than the first one did. Because aside from the marketing campaign, which I thought was fantastic, really engaging, really funny, like Twitter accounts of Megan engaging with the Twitter accounts of Chucky, I thought the film was dull. It was flat and it was dull. And I'm not holding up an awful lot of hope for the sequel, if I'm honest. Will I go see it though? Yes, I will. Because I'm a glutton for punishment and I'm also a completionist. So because I've seen the first one, I've got to go back and see the second one. So going back to some positives, finally, we are getting 28 years later. Oh my God, so exciting. It has felt like such a long time coming. I really, really hope it is worth the wait. This is 23 years later after, well, this is going to get confusing, 23 years after 28 Days Later was released, and 18 years after 28 Weeks Later was released. So it's been a long time. It's been 18 years since we last had an installment from this franchise. Danny Boyle is behind this one again, which is fantastic news. And again, it looks like a really stellar cast. So going purely off of IMDb, we've got people like Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Ralph Fiennes, Jodie Comer, Jack O'Connell, who he was in Skins. He was kind of the lead chav in Eden Lake. He's terrifying, but he's a fantastic actor. So really great cast there. I'm so excited for this. This is definitely one of my most anticipated for 2025. I cannot wait to see what this brings. And then another early release in 2025, middle of February, we've got The Monkey. There's already been some teaser trailers for this that have been in the cinema and online, and it's based on a short story from Stephen King about two brothers who find their dad's old monkey symbols toy in the attic, and a series of horrible deaths occur. So they throw the toy out, they move on with their lives, and they grow apart. Not only am I such an enormous fan of Stephen King, which makes me excited for this anyway, but this has been directed by Osgood Perkins, who was the director of Longlegs, and my God, what a film that was. That was one of my top films for 2024. Some argument around whether it's a horror or not, but I'll not get into that on this episode. I thought it was phenomenal. And I cannot wait to see what he does. Already the trailer, the little teaser trailer, the aesthetic of it feels creepy. I'm just hoping that this is a good Stephen King adaptation, because some of them can be a little bit hit or miss. So we will see what that looks like. So that's another 2 positives for you. Time for another one that I'm not looking forward to. And that is The Black Phone 2. Another Blumhouse film and another sequel to what was already a terrible film the first time around. So I know I'm going to get some flack for this, because there are some people that absolutely love the first one, but I thought it was an absolute snooze fest. I saw it at the cinema, and I've seen it a couple of times since. I've forced myself to sit through it to try and see what other people see in it. But when I saw it at the cinema, I left the theatre feeling angry, because it was so obvious that Blumhouse had basically created the film with the intention of it being a franchise. There were so many things that weren't explained. There was barely any focus on the grabber, who was the main draw of the film, and it just left it open to exploring further films. I just thought it was such a cash grab. While also being so incredibly dull, it provided nothing new, and I will die alone on this hill if I have to. I can only hope that they do more with the grabber in the second one than they did with the first one, because I just thought it was such a waste of talent with Ethan Hawke, who I think is phenomenal, and it absolutely pains me to say that I didn't enjoy the first one, The Black Phone. Like I said, I will be going to see the second one just because I am a completionist, so I'll just sit through that with gritted teeth in the hopes that it gives me something different than the first one. Right, swinging back to some positives. We have got, however you want to say this, Saw 11 or Saw XI. It was originally supposed to be released this year, but then it was pushed back to 2025. Which I'm hoping is a good sign. I'm hoping that's because They saw the positive reaction to Saw X, and they decided to spend a little bit more time crafting the story of Saw 11 rather than just cranking out another Saw film. I know that people will have mixed feelings about there being an 11th Saw film. However, I am a huge, huge fan of the franchise as a whole, and I would welcome 20 of them if there is enough storyline to pack into 20 films. And actually, Saw X showed us that there was still more story to tell with some of John Kramer's history and the reasoning behind his actions. Not much has been released regarding the plot of this, but I do believe that Tobin Bell has been confirmed to reprise his role as John Kramer, Jigsaw. So I'm hoping, this would be my own personal hopes, that it is either a direct follow-on from X, so set in between 1 and 2 and picking up directly from that instalment, or it's set between 2 and 3, so Detective Hoffman's backstory and his relationship with Kramer can be properly explored. But that's definitely one that I am excited for. And I'll die alone on that hill as well. I'm going to be dying alone on lots of hills at this rate. But while we're talking about franchises and further installments, a franchise I will never get enough of is Final Destination, and we have got Final Destination Bloodlines set to release in 2025. That will be the 6th installment in the Final Destination set of films. Again, the plot is completely under wraps, so we're clueless about what the film is going to be about, but I did read something online which gave me some hope. I did enjoy reading it, that the two directors, Zap Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein, they orchestrated a death scene during their pitch to the studio over Zoom. So they used a bit of a mixture of some pre-recorded footage, some special effects, and then some live stuff going on over Zoom. What they did was, it was basically a bit of a skit involving a fire and then a ceiling fan that dropped from the ceiling and decapitated one of them, which made the executive shocked initially, but also burst into laughter. And I think that suggests that they understand the Final Destination franchise, the fact that it needs that edge of humour alongside the shock factor and alongside the brutal deaths. So that is what makes me quite excited for Final Destination Bloodlines, given we know nothing else about it. So now for a sequel that I couldn't care less about. Once again, similarly to Mithrigan and Black Phone 2, I couldn't care less about The Strangers Chapter 2. My god, how pointless Chapter 1 was. They might as well have not bothered. The original's great, it's not a masterpiece, but a great home invasion film. But Chapter 1 added absolutely nothing. The storyline for Chapter 2 seems to be more of the same. A couple break down, they take refuge in an Airbnb, and they're terrorised by 3 masked strangers. Are we going to get something different? Probably not. Will I go see it? Probably yes. But I really hope they give us something different with Strangers Chapter 2, based on the fact that Strangers Chapter 1 was completely and utterly pointless and gave us nothing. So we'll see about that. I'm going to talk about another sequel now, flipping back to the positives. There's so many sequels coming out next year. It seems like a year of sequels. We go through phases with this. But Conjuring Last Rites. Now, I am a fan of the Conjuring films. I like following the story of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I think they are creepy films. I think the jump scares are really well done. But at the same time, I am glad that this has been confirmed as the final installment of The Conjuring, because I would just hate for this series to go down the same road as Insidious. I know I'm going to get flack for this, where they are basically flogging a dead horse. Like, it feels like there have been so many installments of Insidious, and Red Door just did nothing for me. It just felt like, again, they shouldn't have bothered with that film. So hopefully we are finishing on a positive with Conjuring Last Rites. I'm excited to see Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson back together again. I think they work really well together on screen. They've both posted some really sweet and heartwarming comments and tributes to each other as they've wrapped on filming on set. And that just shows the amount of love that they've had for each other doing these films. And I think that shows on screen. So very much excited for that. Now, the next film that I'm going to talk about is not a sequel. Surprise, surprise, given it is a year of sequels, but it is a reimagining of a very, very well-loved story, and that is Frankenstein. So that is currently in post-production. Set to release in 2025, but no confirmed date yet, so I am hoping it stays in 2025. However, this is in the hands of director Guillermo del Toro, who is an enormous Frankenstein fan, so at least we know that this is being overseen by someone who has a real care for the story and the characters, as well as having an exceptional craft for monster stories. The cast, I keep talking about the cast with these films that I'm looking forward to because they just sound insane. But you've got Jacob Elordi playing the monster. Now, I hadn't heard of this guy until Saltburn came along last year, and now I am obsessed with him, and I cannot wait for him to play the monster. I think he'll be utterly incredible. But then you've got Mia Goth, like modern day Scream Queen Mia Goth. However you feel about the films that she's in, she is an exceptional actor. You've got Christoph Waltz, again, incredible. Oscar Isaac, Charles Dance, who... just going to drop it in there. I met a couple of months ago and had a little cuddle and a selfie with him, and he's absolutely adorable and I love him forever. But then I've just got to drop that in there. Like, anytime anyone's going to bring up Charles Dance, I'm going to mention that I met him. But then you've also got Ralph Ineson. You'll know him from The Witch and from Game of Thrones. And then Bern Gorman, who I adore from the Pacific Rim films, and I find him quite sinister and creepy, so I'm interested to see who he is going to be playing. But like I said, exceptional cast. Really, really excited for that. So this is the last one that I'm going to mention that I am not excited for, and then we are going to finish on a couple of positives, because I just feel it would be terrible to end on a negative. And it is another sequel. And it is another Blumhouse film. And yes, I will go see it regardless. But Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Now, don't get me wrong. I thought that the first one was okay. It wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't amazing either. As someone who I've played a couple of the games, I've watched full walkthroughs of some of the others. I know a lot of the lore. And I wasn't impressed. So when it came out, I aired that in a review, and a lot of the response that I got was, oh, it was for the die-hard FNAF fans, Five Nights at Freddy's fans. That's who it was for. I'm sorry, but I completely disagree with that argument. Blumhouse, as god-awful as their films can be, they don't set out to make a film purely for the Five Nights at Freddy's fans, because that is, as much as it might seem like a large fan base if you are in it, actually in the grand scheme of things, and Blumhouse wanting to make the money that they do make, aren't going to make a film purely for that little fan base. So I just think that's a load of rubbish. I'm sorry. They churn out films, they make a lot of money doing so, but they make overall pretty lame horror films with the exception of a couple of little gems. And this was a lame one. Like, I thought the aesthetics of the first one were great. I love a horror film that's really bright and colourful, and I loved the character designs, and I will love Matthew Lillard in anything that he does. But I just don't hold out an awful lot of hope for Five Nights at Freddy's 2 based on the first one. But again, I will go and see it regardless because I am a completionist and I need to see what happens next. Okay, so we'll finish on a couple of positives. A film that I feel was due a reboot, and I'm surprised that this hasn't come sooner actually, but I Know What You Did Last Summer is getting a reboot in 2025. I have such a love for the original from 1997. The 90s were not a great decade for horror, with the exception of a couple. You know, you've got like Scream in there, and you have I Know What You Did Last Summer. But I couldn't find an awful lot about the plot other than a group of friends is terrorized by a stalker who knows about a gruesome incident from their past. So it is following the same format as the original. And you've also got Jennifer Love Hewitt reprising her role as Julie alongside Freddie Prinze Jr. in his role as Ray. But then you've got a couple of other people in the cast who I think could be quite interesting. So having looked online, you've got Madeline Klein, who you might know from Glass Onion, the Knives Out tale. Can't remember her character's name, but I thought she was fantastic in it. And then you've got Nicholas Alexander Chavez, who recently portrayed Lyle Menendez from this year's TV series about the Menendez brothers. He was incredible in that, so sinister. The pair of them, horrendous story. But I'm really interested to see what is done with I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'm really hoping that it will drive people to go back and watch the original, because I think it often gets overlooked because of the decade. And when people think of the 90s, they often think of Scream, when actually I think I Know What You Did Last Summer is a decent little slasher. So yes, very excited for that one. And then the last one to mention, which is an odd one, because I have basically crapped all over Blumhouse in this episode, and I stand by what I said. They do churn out some really terrible films, and I am totally screwing myself over ever being able to work with them based on what I have said already. However, I am quite excited to see what they do with Wolfman. Mainly because this is being written and directed by Leigh Whannell. Not only do I absolutely love him in his role as Adam in Saw, but I thought that he did an absolutely incredible job with The Invisible Man from 2020. So knowing that he is back to take on another Universal Monsters reprisal, that really excites me. I've seen a couple of little snippets of trailers. I've tried to avoid trailers wherever possible, actually, for this one. But I just think it'll be really interesting to see what he does. So yeah, that is kind of my insight, very brief whistle-stop tour into some of the films that are coming out in 2025. There are loads more. It looks like it's going to be a bumper year for horror, actually, which is very exciting. And obviously, I haven't even included anything on there from the likes of Netflix or Shudder, any originals. And I know that we will have horror films that crop up throughout the year. We had that a lot this year as well, where we didn't know going into 2024 that they were going to be released, like Heretic, for example. So I'm hoping it is going to be a positive year. I think 2024 ended up being a really good year, and I think we're in for more of the same from 2025. But do let me know if I haven't mentioned a film that you are really excited for. Do come and chat with me over on my socials. You can either follow me on Instagram. So there is a Rate Scary account on Instagram. If you are watching this on YouTube, please do drop a like and a subscribe and leave a comment telling me which film you are excited for. Or you can also find me, Scary Zara Mary, on pretty much any other social media platform going. I am on Instagram, I am on TikTok, I am on Threads, I am on Blue Sky. I'm probably on Face Party and MySpace and Friends Reunited. But do come and find me and join in the conversation and let me know what you think. Am I dying alone on some of these hills that I've created for myself in this episode? Or are you going to come and join me on them? Please come and keep me company wherever possible. And then also just to mention my Patreon. If you didn't know, I have a Patreon that is live. There are 2 tiers. So the first tier gives you access to some behind the scenes content, and each month you'll get a bonus episode of the podcast. You'll get a shout out on the podcast, and you can also influence what I talk about on the podcast, which should make things interesting. And then the second tier is if you are interested in seeing some more photos in addition to the ones that I post on my Instagram. So that is it from me for this week. I look forward to getting stuck in next week to the first of our subgenres, which is Gothic horror. So do come and tell me online on one of my socials about some of the films within Gothic horror that you love, maybe some of the ones that you don't love as well, and I'll be sure to incorporate those in the episode. But I'll leave it at that. See you with you then. I'll see you next time.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I'll be right back.
Game over.
It's all for you!
Beware the moonlights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number 1